I made a really aggro build, and I made a like slow consistent build, and I ended up mixing them both because a lot of the pieces work well together, and the deck itself felt really good in testing. I had like an 80% win rate total against everything. Just during the day itself, it was a very weird event. So yeah, we'll just hop into the deck, because if you saw it on Twitter, there were some weird cards in there that people aren't playing, and I want to go over it. So first, V-Starter. Yeah, not much choice there. Then our main grade 3 is for Leopold of Us. So act once per turn, you can lock a Leopold, and then until the end of the turn, all the cards you discard from your deck get normal, trigger, and order card types. And then his second effect is act once per turn, counterblast 1. You discard the top card of your deck and perform all of the following effects in any order depending on the card type. So if it's a normal unit, you check top 5 and call any 2 and shuffle. If it's a trigger, then your Leopold gets a skill that your front row has plus 5k and he gains a crit. And if it's an order, you get an Excel marker. So couple things with this. So basically, whenever you lock your Leopold, you will get all of his effects. So you'll typically go like Power Boost, Excel marker, and call top 5. Because you want the Excel marker to have an additional space to potentially call something. And this is the only other card in the premium that plus 3s, like Enterana and Cat. And it also deck thins 2 cards out of your deck. So how this deck plays a lot of the time is you want to get all of your normal units out of your deck as quickly as possible and put your trigger units back into your deck. So then on turn 4 or 5, you'll have like a 10 card deck and like 7 of them are front triggers or something like that. And if you hit a front with this deck, a lot of the time you'll just win the game. So in order to make this consistent, we have to lock a Leopold. So we can lock itself, or we can lock the original Leopold, which I currently play 3. In my list I topped with in Vancouver, I only played 2 because it was just Steam Maiden the entire time. So my idea was to use Parakeet and Mini Bellies to consistently find your second Leopold anyway, and you just have more space on like shield and cards that can guard attacks. Now, since there's more options in the format, with Luard and Thavis specifically, you need more Leopolds to be able to consistently find your lock, and then once they get rid of that, you want to be able to find your new locks. So yeah, a couple other things with Leopold of Us. His first skill isn't like the Isabel's, where Isabel gives you both effects. Reverse just makes everything those card types, so you have the option of either of the effects, but you don't get both. And then his first effect, also, whatever cards you discard keeps that type till the end of the turn, which matters a lot with this next card. So yeah, that's it for the Leopolds. This is me editing the video and just now realizing that I forgot to say that this video is sponsored by 50 cards. If you need any splits of future sets, any cases, any boxes, any supplies, anything under the sun, there is a link in the description to his store, and you can use discount code FLAIR to get 5% off your order. But yeah, back to the video. And then for our last grade 3 is 3 Tester Fox. So on place, you counterblast 1, put 2 cards from your drop zone to the bottom of your deck, and he gets plus 5. And if you returned a trigger and a normal unit, then you can search your deck for a Researcher Fox and call it to rearguard. And then his second skill is Act. You can Soul Blast 1, give a rearguard plus 10, and at the end of the turn it retires. And if it was a Researcher Fox that retired, then you draw a card. So this is how we are able to put our triggers back into our deck. With the combination of Leo Reverse and Tester Fox, we're able to rip 2 normal units out of our deck and put trigger units back into our deck. So we deck thin really hard through this, and we're able to hit our triggers more consistently. And the one other interaction with these two is because the cards you mill are all the card types until end of turn. What happens is if you mill something off Leopold, let's say we milled a front trigger, then that front trigger can be considered as a trigger, as a normal unit, or an order card. So this matters a lot with Tester, because if you mill a front and then you call Tester, you can use that front trigger you milled as a normal unit and then another front trigger in your drop zone as a trigger unit. and then you get the search off Researcher, but the big thing is that you shuffle your deck. So this matters a lot during the late stages when you have like very low amount of cards in your deck. Then you can call Tester and then put one of the milled fronts and another front from your drop zone back into your deck, and then you shuffle. Even if you don't have a target to call, you'll still be able to shuffle. So those fronts are actually in your deck and you have a chance of hitting them. The other way you can do it is if you have a Tester in hand and you haven't done Leopold's skill yet, you can call Tester and put 2 fronts that were already in there to the bottom of the deck, and then you do Leopold of Us skill, and then you'll do its normal unit part where you check top 5 and call 2, but then you shuffle. So either way, you will get that shuffle. Just with that second variation, you don't get the search or Researcher. But if you have a ton of units you're able to play anyway, then it doesn't super matter. His Soul Blast effect also helps on being able to push the game. I wanted to make this build less reliant on hitting a front trigger while still being able to get there. And in combination, what happened with the deck is that if we do hit a front trigger, then it's really easy to kill our opponent because we have other ways to gain power and really just scale up the numbers really high. And Tester's one of those cards where you can use a soul to give something +10, and then at the end of the turn you'll be able to draw a card back, assuming it was a Researcher Fox. So you're able to keep your hand healthy while also building a board to push the opponent. That is it for Tester. Next is the grade 2s and its counterpart Researcher. So while it's on an Excel marker, every time you discard a card from your deck, she gets +5k. And then whenever it's retired from your guard by a card's ability, you can Counterblast 1 and add a copy of your Vanguard from your deck to your hand. So, of course, it pairs with Tester because Tester can search it, Tester can get it to retire, and then you'll also draw off Tester, and then Researcher will be able to search for another copy of Leopold of Us. So, this is really important in here because you'll usually discard like 1 to 3 cards every turn from your deck. So Researcher can become a 24k attacker minimum during your turn. So because it will be on Excel markers, so 14, Leopold will give your front row +5, so 19. And then if you milled one, then it'll be 24, which is a really solid number to hit through a damage trigger. The other thing is that since this can add a copy of your Vanguard to your hand, you can find another Leopold of Us. And a lot of the time you want to re-ride Leopold and not have to call a reverse down to lock. So then you can get a lot of Excel markers. So then on your turn 4, you'll have 7 attacks. And if you hit a front, then you get 70k free power from it, which is crazy. So Researcher makes this deck a lot more consistent on getting to that late game scenario. And it also really helps into matchups where they retire a lot. So like Luard and Thavis can retire your Leopolds consistently. So Researcher able to find another one that you can find the lock is really important. So yeah, Researcher is basically a must-have because you always want to find one to call off Tester until maybe late game scenarios. But early game, you definitely want to find this. Next, to Binoculars Tiger. So Vanguard Rearguard, whenever it attacks a Vanguard, you Counterblast 1, mill the top card of your deck. And if that card is a normal unit, you draw one. If it's a trigger unit, you retire an opponent's Rearguard and give 3 front row units +5k until end of turn. So this is really good because it's a lottery effect that Leopold can change. So you can pick whichever one you want, assuming you've locked off Leopold. A lot of the times, you'll go for the trigger effect where you retire something and give 3 units +5. Because then this makes your numbers really scary. And you're able to snipe off like Gearcats from the field and make the Steam Maiden player lose a lot of extra power that they normally have. And also, with Researcher, you mill one, so Researcher will get +5 off of it. And then the 5k boost Binoculars gives just gives you way more power. But there are situations where you do want the draw, because you might be bricking sometimes, which this deck doesn't super brick that often. Or you just need more shield. But having it more than 2, the card just gets so cluttered because you don't want to use it that often. It's just like, if you have the spare Counterblast, you will. Because you most of the time are using 2 Counterblasts a turn for Leopold of Us and Tester Fox. So yeah, you don't want to use this all the time. But whenever it comes up big on being able to hit those magic numbers and help kill the opponent when needed. And now the weird part of the deck. in my Vancouver list, I played Blusher Parakeet and Geograph Giant, and this was mainly to help push for numbers with Geograph to try to kill the opponent. And also for Parakeet, I was only running 6 different Leopolds at the time. So Parakeet being able to consistently find you the second Leopold is really big. But now, I don't like Parakeet that much. It swings 12k by itself, which isn't a magic number to hit over force numbers. And force is like dominating the meta right now. And then it also just randomly retires itself at the end of the turn. The only thing it does is that it helps find your grade 3s. But if we find alternatives that can do somewhat the same thing, then it works a lot better. So for the rest of our grade 2s, I'm running 3 Hamhiko and 2 Fossa. A lot of this is theory I've learned from Solomon Vanguard's Vanguard Mastery course. And he basically talks about card roles in the deck. And these two share very similar roles. So they are both ride targets, but they do like somewhat different things. So Fossa, whenever you play it from hand, you can Counterblast 1, check top 2, you call 1 and discard the other. And then Rearguard once per turn, whenever it attacks, if your Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, you can Soul Blast 1, give a Rearguard plus 10, and at the end of the turn, it will retire. And then Hamhiko is, when placed, you Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, look at top 2, you put 1 into hand, you don't have to reveal it, and then you discard the other, and then Vanguard Rearguard once per turn, whenever you discard a card from your deck, Hamhiko gets plus 5 for the turn. So why are these good? So we'll start with Fossa. So in some matchups, whenever you go first, you want to aggro them super hard, like Steam Maiden, and try to put damage on the board, because if you let Steam Maiden live for too long, then they're just going to farm a bunch of cards off Enterana and Cat, and it makes it really impossible to kill them in the later stages of the game. So Fossa being able to call a free unit down that you can just attack with is really powerful, but also is another alternative to Tester Fox, because his Soul Blast effect is basically the same, except it's on attack instead of an act. So you can kind of mask the bonus power you'll have from Fossa and make the opponent guess on where you're going to put that 10k, and it can give it to itself even. So there's a lot of times where this extra plus 10 does come up, and sometimes you'll have like a Tester in play and a Fossa in play, and you have 2 soul, so you can get plus 20k during your turns. So Fossa is just like a really strong alternative to Tester, to where you can consistently try to get that extra power boost. And then the other card, Hamhiko. So Hamhiko's like the defensive option compared to Fossa, because 1, it adds the card to your hand, so if you're missing a Leopold, then this can still find it like Parakeet could. And 2, if you're going second into a force matchup, it will automatically get plus 5 and be 14, so you can hit them. And then in the later stages of the game, it becomes basically a 14k beater, which if it's on an Excel marker and you're on reverse and you did reverse skill, then it'll become a 24k attacker, which is a really solid number to hit over the opponent. The one bad thing about Hamhiko is that it uses that soul early. So the counterblast cost is pretty whatever. As long as you have a Lima, then the cost is okay. The soul though, it's really hard to get soul back. We have Lima for that, but we always want to use Lima for countercharge that early in the game. So this basically makes our turn 3 slightly weaker, where we can't do multiple testers or another card in the grade 1 slot that I'm running. But the extra card you get in your hand is super valuable still, because Parakeet can only grab grade 3s. Now you have a higher chance to find whatever grade 3 you're looking for, because you check top 7. But a lot of times, you'll actually want to be looking for other cards that aren't grade 3s. Mainly, a lot of our grade 1s are really good targets to look for. So Hamhiko being able to find those is really powerful. And then it's just a better card later on being able to hit those big numbers to try to kill the opponent. So yeah, this is the weird part. I really liked this. I feel like a lot of people won't, but with how this meta shaped up, I think Hamhiko and Fossa are really good options compared to Parakeet. And yeah, that is it for grade 2s. Next up is grade 1s, and grade 1s are really insane in this deck. So we have 4 grade 3 searcher. So normal thing, it's a normal grade 3 searcher, but Mini Belly fulfills so many rules in this deck. One, it is a 13k booster for reverse. So reverse is able to swing for 30k 2 crit because of it, which against Steam Maiden, they have to guard more than just grade 4 Uluru in order to make it 2 to pass. And then again, in other matchups, if they don't have a perfect guard, then they're really threatened by hitting double trigger. And if it's a front, you don't have to like decide where that trigger goes. The other part is such as for grade 3s, which we need 2 different Leopolds in order to consistently get our effect off. So having the mini belly be able to help search for them directly is really nice. It is also a 13k beater by itself. So you can put it on an Excel circle with Leopold skill active, and it will be a 23k swing. Or you can put it in the front row somewhere and it'll be an 18k swing. So Mini Belly is one of our strongest attackers as well. And the last big thing it does is that it shuffles. So like Leopold plus Tester, you call Tester first, then do Leopold skill to shuffle. But sometimes you'll find the Tester after you do Leopold skill. And then you want to do Tester to put fronts back in, but you didn't mill a front trigger off an effect. So with Mini Belly, it gives us a free way to shuffle our deck. So we can call Tester, put 2 fronts to the bottom, and then we call Mini Belly, and then we're able to shuffle our deck afterwards. So we basically get those fronts shuffled in anyway, which is really powerful and really helps the consistency of hitting those fronts. So yeah, Mini Belly's a 4 in here. If you run any less, you're kind of trolling yourself. Yeah, easily the best grade 1 in the deck, and you want to see it often. The other good grade 1 in here is Inferior Lima. So this is how we're able to not have as much resource problems. So when placed on rearguard, if your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, then you have to discard a top card of your deck. If it's a normal unit, you soul charge 1. If it's a trigger, you counter charge 1. Now with Leopold of Us, you're able to choose which one you get to do. So during like your first grade 3 turn, a lot of the times you'll want to counter charge. So then you can do your reverse effect, your tester effect, and then you also probably use Ham Hiko effect on grade 2. So you want to have as much counterblast as possible during that time frame. Our soul charge effect comes in a lot more later in the game. So then we can use our tester and Fossas during the end games and try to kill the opponent. And we have one other card in here that uses a bit of soul. So having the soul charge effect is really important as well. You basically like use them pretty evenly in this build. And this card is how the deck can play even if your opponent tries to damage deny you. Next is Coiling Duckbill. So I played this in Vancouver as well. Originally it was because Colossus was really powerful and we just needed to have more cards in our hand to be able to deal with the 2-card guard district. So being able to have this get milled and then add it to hand is really strong, or you can call it to be aggressive with, and then at the end of the turn you can retire it and draw a card to replace itself. So Duckbill just helped in that regard, but now since Colossus is banned, you would think, oh, cards in hand aren't as important, but in a lot of matchups you still want to find more pieces to be able to reuse during your game, and then the draw also just helps either just find your piece, find more shield, things like that. And then also having this get milled to add to hand potentially is still really powerful. Because a lot of the times your hand might be a little cluttered with grade 3s or grade 2s and you don't have that much shield early on. So Duck being either a 10k shield you add to hand or a way to draw a card from your deck is really strong. And so combined with Tester, you use 2 soul to draw 2 cards at the end of your turn, and you also get a power boost from Tester. And then if you have the counterblast for Researcher, then you can also add a Leopold of Us to hand. So you basically just refill your hand to be able to do a bigger turn on your next turn. This also comes up in the Link Joker matchup if you do face it, because it can retire itself at the end of the turn, and then you don't have to deal with the lock nearly as much. So yeah, I think Duck is still pretty important. Whenever I was playtesting against Steam Maidens, it was really hard to keep up because I kept having like a smaller hand size because I was playing a more aggressive build. And I thought that I could try to putting in Duck again to try to rebuild my hand during the end of the turn and find more shield value and pieces to be able to play the game off of, and it made a world of a difference. So I think Duck is pretty good. I don't think most players run it, but the deck just feels so bad without the duck. So yeah, last for grade 1s is 2 Bushboek. So whenever you ride it, you can discard a card and draw a card. And at end of battle, if boosted, you can retire him and give a rear guard plus 10k. So this is a decent ride target, because if we're going second, we want to get rid of the quick shield and try to find other pieces in our hand usually. Or if our hand is cluttered with grade 3s, then we can pitch them off to try to find more shield value. So this can just help fix your hand a bit. This has saved me from bricking multiple times. But the big thing is his end of battle skill, to be able to give a unit plus 10. So this does multiple things. One, it's a free plus 10 that doesn't use any counterblast as Soul Blast. So you're able to get extra power during your finishing turns whenever you're gassed out on resources, and you're able to still keep up and push the opponent afterwards. And the second big thing is that it retires. So if we don't find Tester or Fossa as a way to retire, then Bushboek is another form for the duck, where you can make a column of Duck Bushboek, and then it'll be a 21k swing, and then at the end of the battle you'll retire Bush to give 10k to something, and then you'll do Duck to retire itself and draw mid-battle phase. So you're still able to consistently get Duck off, and it's really solid in that regard. So yeah, I think Bush is pretty solid in here. Last is triggers, and this trigger lineup is normal. I did try a lot of variations though. So we run 8 front, 4 draw, 4 heal. So there were a couple of ideas I tried. The first one was the idea of putting in more front triggers. And yes, that would mean cutting into our sentinels and heals at that point. But my analysis of the deck was that if you don't hit a front, the deck is pretty bad, and that the deck doesn't have an early game. So we basically could sacrifice a heal trigger to put in a 9th front and be able to try to push the opponent harder, because we aren't as reliant on our heals at that point. We're more reliant on trying to kill them as quickly as possible. And so that was an idea I tried, but whenever I played through the games and kept track of if that 9th front did a difference, it really did not. A lot of the time it was just the 4th heal came up way more. And healing in this format right now is really broken, because it gives you more time against Steam Maidens to try to kill them. But also, in a lot of matchups, they try to put you at a certain damage range and then try to kill you from there. But if you heal out, then you potentially put them out of your kill range, and you're able to live through turns a lot easier that way. And then also the defense early whenever you go second is still important to stabilize your game plan and not get completely railed if they go first. And it just puts up a fighting chance whenever you go second into a lot of matchups. So the other thing was draw triggers. I experimented a lot with crit sentinels, because my idea was that because Colossus is gone, then a lot of attacks will still be guardable with one card. So Critnals is strong in that regard. And then also having actual crit pressure on Leopold is really powerful. So it was open deck list, so the opponents could see our decks. And if they see, oh, he's running crits in there, then that does multiple things. One, it makes Leopold able to deal 3 damage, which is really strong in itself on being able to threaten lethal a lot easier. And 2, if we end up having a ton of power, which in the variation I tried a super aggro heavy build, then we can very easily get oh, if we hit a front and then a crit, then our Researcher Fox will be 44k with a crit, and it actually puts pressure with those big numbers we are getting, which is pretty good in itself. What I've come to realize though is in this meta, it's really, really hard to kill people like that, because in the Steam Maiden mirror, they will basically farm a ton of cards, so you can't burst kill them ever. Orange farms a ton of cards, Luard can farm a bit of cards, and they'll basically always have enough shield to deal with a crit, and then on their turn to clap back, that we just didn't have a hand to defend, because in that variation I wasn't running draw triggers or ducks, so it just made it really hard to make it through turn 3 or 4. So the draw PGs, the draw trigger comes up so much because we are very piece reliant, so finding our pieces is big. And then defensively, if we hit a defensive draw, that's really huge as well into any matchup. The Perfect Guard is also just good because the 3 best stacks hit for really big numbers. So like in Steam Maidens, the Vanguard is always swinging for like 50k plus because for some reason a Lul gets a ton of free power on Vanguard for no reason. And then in other matchups like Luard, you can Perfect Guard basically any of the attacks that say farm force markers so much. And then in Anj, you can either Perfect Guard Vanguard or the like 4 force marker stacked rear guard that's gonna restand. So there's just a lot of situations where a Perfect Guard is just better than a Crit Sentinel right now defensively, because we are in a force meta where generating a ton of force markers is like the game plan for most decks. So this next section is gonna be talking about all the cards I have tried. So yeah, first, more fronts. It was an idea I tried. I think if we went in a force meta, this idea could be something we come back to in the future. But for now, our heals and sentinels are really important on being able to get through our turns. So yeah, something I did try. Critnals, just went over it and all the reasons I didn't end up playing it. Again, if we're not in a force meta, this can come back as well. 20k shield heals. This did come up sometimes. Just like the big things though is that our grade 3 heals are searchable for mini belly, and we didn't have that much of an issue going first, because going first we're able to just slam the opponent and just rock their world. So we just needed ways to restabilize our going second game plan, which grade 3 heals did a lot better. Now because we do have grade 3 searchers, there is a reason to play like 1 or 2 of this maybe. So this is something you could experiment with as well. Then we have the grade 1 sentinels that whenever you ride it you can draw a card and discard a card. So we basically play these if we end up cutting through our sentinels in our trigger lineup for more front triggers. But also just having the on-ride skill is pretty solid as well, since we're a piece reliant deck. It's just the one other like sacrifice you make with that is that if you find it off Leopold of Us, you basically are either keeping this in your deck as a non-trigger, or you call it and you lose a sentinel. So there is cost for this, but it is definitely a solid option if you end up putting in more fronts. Taping Cat. Taping Cat's basically just a worse duckbill to me. The one cool thing Cat can do is it gives power to something. So if you're trying to be more aggressive, then you can use Taping Cat as a way to get more power. But most of the time you use it for the draw effect, which Duck just did better most of the time. And also cleared itself off the field. The one other cool thing Cat can do is if you're running a lot of it, then you can call over them, and since it's retired, you can Soul Blast and draw, because it doesn't have to be retired from an effect. So if you call over it, then it is still considered retired, and you can do its effect that way. So there's a couple cool things Taping Cat can do. I just found Duck just consistently did a better job than Cat did. And now the one card I really do miss is Scaled Toucan. So whenever you call it to rearguard, you can, from hand, you can Soul Blast one and bounce one of your other rearguards back to your hand. And Vanguard rearguard once per turn, whenever you discard a card from deck, he gets plus 5k for turn. So I really do miss this card. This card is so sick. So cool things this can do, combined with Leopold of Us, if not a lot, but sometimes with Leopold of Us, you check top 5 and it's just all triggers. And it's really hard to like build a board that way. So what you can do is you call down like a Perfect Guard, and then you call Scaled Toucan from your hand and bounce that Perfect Guard back to your hand. So then you're able to find your resources better, and you just have better shield value that way. This also basically acts as another copy of all of your on-place effects. So cool interactions with this. Fossa can call another thing from the top. So you can build a board off his Counterblast and his bounce. There's Hamhiko, where you can draw 2 cards. It just costs 3 soul, so like this play never came up. There's Mini Belly, which this does come up a lot for Mini Belly, where you can bounce it to hand, call it, check top 5 for a grade 3, and then you shuffle. So like if you have a Mini Belly in play already, and then you call Tester, then you can call Scale Toucan to bounce Mini Belly back, and then call it again, and then shuffle those fronts in. There's Lima. So The obvious thing is that this can turn Lima into a Soul Blast 1, Mill 2, and Counter Charge 2. But also, a really unique thing you can do is if you're trying to just get a bunch of power on your researchers, then you can call Lima, mill, and Soul Charge, and then call Toucan to bounce the Lima back, and then call Lima again to mill and Soul Charge. So if you know your deck is like really low on triggers, and you still have like a 20 card deck, there are games where you have like a 20 card deck and like 4 triggers in there because you haven't seen a tester. Then one way you can like clear those normal units out is through this play, and you rip 4 cards out of your deck that way, and you still gain a soul off of it. And then in the process, your researchers will gain power for each mill. And then the last one, of course, is Tester Fox. So with Tester, it is like perfect synergy, actually. So you can do his on-play skill to shuffle triggers back in again, which does come up quite a bit because there are a lot of times where like you go through your testers very quickly, or like you damage one, you accidentally mill one, and then you just have less testers that way. So having skill 2 can be able to make multiple uses out of one Tester Fox is really important in there. But also his second effect can also be used twice. So if you just have like 3 soul and you haven't used it at all, then if you have a tester that's already just in play from the turn before, you can call Toucan, bounce the tester back, and then call the tester, do his on place, and then you can use his Soul Blast skill again. So you go Tester Soul Blast, Toucan bounce, call tester, Soul Blast again, and you get 2 Soul Blast effects off of that. So yeah, Scale Toucan is just really neat and really cool on a lot of things it can accomplish. Just because we're running Duck in here, we just don't have the soul ever to use this. So this is something you can experiment with also. I do really miss this card. And the other grade one I do miss is Clerical Kakapo. So when placed, Vanguard or Rearguard, you discard the top card. If it's a normal unit, you draw 1, discard 1. If it's a trigger, you draw 1, put a card from your hand to the bottom. So this can help fix your hand. It also is a free mill for researcher to gain more power. And it can put your triggers back from your hand to your deck. So sometimes your hand just becomes flooded with front triggers because you keep sending them back in. And you're running low on testers, or you have no testers sometimes, and you just want more ways to get those fronts back in. So Kakapo, as a way to put those triggers back into your deck and then shuffle them through other means, is really strong, and you definitely will feel the difference of hitting triggers through that. Yeah, and then early game, it just helps fix your hand a bit better because you're trying to find so many things. You want to have a tester, a reverse, a second Leopold of some kind, and potentially a Lima if your opponent's trying to damage deny you. So having Kakapo be able to help find those is really powerful in that regard. Next is grade 2s, so Parakeet. Most people still run Parakeet, and I still think it's a fine option. The main issue I have with it is that it's a 12k attacker, so it doesn't hit force numbers by itself. Now you can put it in front of another rearguard, and then it'll be usually like a 25k swing because of Leopold. But that's still just like a 15k guard, and it just feels super awkward a lot of the time. And then you also have to pay the counterblast in order for him to be a 12k beater. So having Hamhiko be a 14k beater just makes a world of a difference compared to Parakeet. The one cool thing Parakeet can do though is combined with Duck, you can call the Parakeet, do its counterblast skill, and then you'll have a Duck in play, and then at the end of the turn, the Parakeet will retire itself for free, and then the Duck can Soul Blast retire itself and draw something. So that does come up as well. And if you're playing the Gorilla variant, then Parakeet's a lot more important in there because you need to see so many more grade 3s to make it function. So yeah, Parakeet is pretty alright, and it's still a solid option to play. Next, Geograph Giant. So most builds still do run Geograph. I think it's not as great in this current format because if you put it on an Excel marker, then it's 14, then plus 8 makes it 22, and then with Leopold's skill, it makes it 27, which is still a 1-card guard for any Force Clan, which at that point, I'd rather play a card with more utility than Geograph Giant. Now, into Excel and Protect matchups, this card is insane. It's broken in there, but currently, since we're in a very big Force meta, Geograph's numbers aren't as important and aren't as strong. Next is Barcode Zebra. This is basically another copy of Researcher Fox, but instead it can be anywhere instead of on an Excel marker. This build doesn't mill as much as like Isabel does, so you actually don't get that much power off of this. And I found like it's a dead card a lot of the time, because once you get later in the game, you don't want to mill anymore because your deck is super compressed to triggers or you're really close to deck out. So Zebra just has like your turn 3 where it can actually like put in work, but you have to see so many pieces for that to function well. It just doesn't do anything in that regard. And then the last grade 2 I tried was Compass Lion. So 13k body, and then at end of turn you retire one of your rear guards. So a couple cool things with this. One, it's a 13k body, so it just automatically hits good numbers in the Force clans. So with Leopold, it's an 18k body, and then with a front trigger, it's 28. So even not on an Excel circle, this still asks for either a 20k shield, a grade 4 Uluru, or 2 cards. And then also, there is Duck with it. So you can build like an aggressive turn with it, where you ride Compass Line, you call a Duck, and then you have another rear guard somewhere. And then at the end of the turn, you'll have Compass Line retire that rear guard, and then Duck can retire itself and draw a card. So that's really cool. It's also just a free way to activate Duck later in the game if you don't find Tester, Bushboek, Fossa, all those things. And then the defensive 13k can come up into like Excel matchups or Protect matchups. Just right now, since we're in a Force meta, the 13k defensively didn't really do much, and it doesn't really have as much utility as it could. So this is an option still you can play around with. I found that Hamhiko and Fossa just did a better job most of the time than what Compass Lion could bring to the table. Then next up, grade 3s. Hamden, and then plus Culture Gorilla. I just don't like that build, but Hamden by itself is okay because it can make your units just really powerful by itself. And for one counterblast, you basically get more, you get 20k worth of power off of it. And you also get a soul that you can utilize for other cards. And then it replaces that card anyway. So Hamden does come up sometimes, and it just raises the power ceiling of the deck. It's just another grade 3. So your hand can start like bricking up a lot more if you're running Hamden, and you just have less shield value throughout the early game. So if you go second, then you just have less defensive options to try to stop people. Amber's Triangular, it's a 32k beater on an Excel marker, and then it has on hit pressure to basically force the opponent to guard it, or they have to guard more on the next attack. And it was okay. It's just like, again, we're in a Force meta, so 32 is not like a great number into them because it's a 15 and a 5k, but if it was 33, then it'd be a 15 and a 10k. It's also a grade 3, which we don't have that much space for unless we start cutting into our Testers and extra Leopolds, which is not as great. But in a more aggressive variation of the deck, this is still a great option for that. And then last is Chatnor. Chatnor is really weird. So sometimes your hand just gets flooded with grade 3s, as I've been saying all video. And so having Chatnor be able to turn those grade 3s into like ways to attack from your back row is pretty good. It also draws a card whenever it attacks, which is also pretty good. And also is like a mini Binoculus, where you guarantee to get the draw, but then you can also give power to 2 things. Just those things you give power to will retire at the end of the turn, which does like hurt the deck actually a little bit. Because once you get to so many Excel markers, you can't fill them up as easily later in the game, even with the 2 free units Leopold gives you. Because then you still have to like call cards from your hand, your opponent probably attacked into some of them, you probably intercepted with some of them, like you've lost a lot of your front row each turn. So Chatnor retiring more units does hurt in that regard. And then also, it's a grade 3, so we don't have as much space for it. And yeah, that is it for this deck. Hope you learned a lot about it. I mainly took this event to try to, instead of work on trying to just win the whole thing, it's to help develop my skills to prepare for a tournament. So I really want to focus on deck building in this regard, and my deck did really well. It functioned like it was supposed to most of the time. And I thought I did really well at finding really cool cards that are underutilized, and not for the sake of playing unique stuff to play unique stuff, but more so to help try to solve issues that the deck has, and I attempted my best to try to solve those issues. So yeah, thank you all for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And yeah, bye. Goodbye. Bye. Later. See ya.